When the bus finally reached my stop, I stood up quickly, eager to leave. My hand was already on the door handle when I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't turn around at first. I just assumed someone else was getting off at the same time. But then I heard them getting closer, the footsteps matching my pace. My heart skipped. I glanced over my shoulder, and there he was right behind me, the man from earlier. I couldn't explain how I knew, but it was him. His face was still obscured in TI was exhausted that night. It was a Friday well past 11 p.m., and I had just finished my shift. The city was practically empty, with only a few street lights flickering in the distance. The last thing I wanted was to wait too long for the bus, so I hurried to the nearest stop, barely having the energy to move. The rain had let up, but the cold air still bit at my skin. My mind was focused solely on getting home as soon as possible. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. My phone vibrated, breaking the silence of the night. I glanced at it and saw an unknown number calling. I ignored it, assuming it was just some telemarketer. But then it vibrated, again and again. Something about it felt different, persistent. I looked at the screen and it was the same number. Against my better judgment, I decided to answer, but before I could say a word, all I heard was slow, heavy breathing on the other end. No words, just that deep, unsettling breath. I couldn't hang up fast enough. I stared at the phone for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. My heart was racing, but I didn't know why. I hung up quickly, hoping the call was just some kind of prank. But as soon as I locked the screen, the bus pulled up. I climbed on, trying to shake off the unease that was settling in my chest. The bus was nearly empty, only a few people scattered throughout, which was unusual for a Friday night. I took a seat by the window, as I always do, and tried to focus on the passing lights outside. But then something caught my eye. There was a man sitting 2 rows behind me, his face hidden in the shadows. The weird part, I could feel his eyes on me. Not directly, but I could see his reflection in the window. His gaze was fixed, like he was studying me, waiting for something. I felt my skin crawl, but I tried to ignore it. I looked away, hoping he wasn't looking at me. But every time I glanced back, I could see his reflection still staring. That uneasy feeling came back, stronger this time, and I couldn't shake it. I tried to focus on anything else. The bus creaked as it moved along, the city lights flashing past, but no matter where I looked, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching me. It wasn't even a logical fear. He wasn't doing anything overtly threatening, but something about his stillness, the way he just sat there, made me feel trapped. The longer I stayed on the bus, the more I felt like I was being suffocated by the silence and the darkness surrounding us. I checked my phone again, hoping to distract myself, but there was nothing, just an empty screen. He shadows, but I could feel his presence like a weight pressing down on me. I tried to ignore him, but my instincts were screaming at me to move faster. I pushed through the door, almost stumbling as I stepped off the bus. The cold night air hit me like a slap in the face, but it didn't help calm my nerves. I quickened my pace, glancing over my shoulder. Again, the man had followed me off the bus. He was still behind me, not in a hurry, just walking steadily, as if he knew exactly where I was going. I picked up my pace even more, turning down a side street, hoping to lose him in the maze of alleyways. But every time I looked back, he was still there, just a few steps behind. I didn't know what to do. Should I confront him? Call someone? I didn't have time to make a decision. I could hear his footsteps getting closer, now louder on the pavement. That's when I realized he wasn't trying to catch up. He was pacing himself, making sure he stayed at the perfect distance. Not too close, but never out of reach. It felt deliberate, like he was toying with me. I turned the corner, heart racing, but when I looked again, he had stopped. Just standing there, watching me from the distance, the same eerie stillness from the bus. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest as I stared back at him. For a split second, it felt like time stopped. His gaze never left me. I couldn't even tell if he was smiling or not. It was just that same unsettling stare. A chill ran down my spine, and I could feel my body tensing, every nerve on high alert. But then, just as quickly as it had all started, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night without another word. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, unable to move, still processing everything that had just happened. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone, almost to check if there was any sign of him calling again. But the screen remained silent. To this day, I can't explain what happened that night. Why he was following me or why it stopped so suddenly. I never saw him again. It's been months now, but every time I take that same route home, I always glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see him lurking in the shadows watching me. It's like he was never really there. But then again, I know what I saw, and I'll never forget the feeling of those eyes on me. I've been working as a rideshare driver for a while now, and most of the time, things go pretty smoothly. But there's one ride I'll never forget. It was a quiet night in the city, one of those rare, calm nights with almost no traffic. When I got the request, I felt a little uneasy, because the pickup was on a quiet street, a spot with barely any movement. Still, I accepted the ride. The street was almost empty when I arrived, and there he was, a man, head down, standing on the sidewalk. He didn't look up, didn't say anything, just got in the car when I pulled up. At first, I didn't think much of it. He didn't speak, just gestured with his hand to indicate where he wanted to go. It was a little odd, but nothing too out of the ordinary. Trying to break the silence, I casually mentioned something about the weather, but he didn't respond. I wasn't too surprised. Some people just aren't chatty, but the whole situation felt a bit off. I kept driving, trying to shake the uneasy feeling. I glanced in the rearview mirror to check if he was comfortable, and that's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. His head was still lowered, like he was staring at the seat, and he wasn't moving, not even a little. I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't help feeling uneasy. It wasn't just that he wasn't talking, there was something about the way he was sitting, so still, that gave me the creeps. I mean, I've had quiet passengers before, but none of them had been this motionless. I checked the rearview mirror again, thinking maybe he'd fallen asleep or something, but no. His head was still down, and I couldn't see his face at all. At this point, I was starting to feel really uncomfortable, but I didn't want to make a scene. Maybe he was having a bad day, I told myself. Maybe he was just really tired. Then, as we got closer to the destination, I looked in the mirror once more, just to check how much longer I'd have to endure the silence. But when I glanced back, I froze. The seat was empty, completely empty. I could see the indentation of where he'd been sitting, the seat belt still in place, but there was no one there. My heart started racing, and I immediately slammed the brakes, pulling over to the side of the road. I looked around, checking the street, the sidewalks, nothing. No sign of him anywhere. I sat there for a few moments, completely frozen. How the hell had he disappeared? I couldn't make sense of what had just happened. I sat there for a few seconds, trying to process it all. Had I missed something? Maybe he'd gotten out at some point, and I hadn't noticed? But that didn't make sense. The street was quiet, no cars around, and I had been driving steadily the whole time. There's no way he could have just vanished without a sound. I started to feel a chill creep up my spine as I replayed the entire ride in my head. His odd behavior, the way he never spoke, the way he sat so still. It all seemed so unnatural now. After what felt like an eternity, I slowly pulled back into traffic, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles were white. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting him to suddenly reappear. But he didn't. The rest of the ride to the drop-off point was a blur. When I arrived, the address he gave me was just a regular street. Nothing special about it. No sign of him anywhere. I waited a moment, just to be sure, but there was no movement. No one came out of the building. No one acknowledged me. I was alone. And that's when I realized I couldn't explain what had just happened. It didn't make any sense. I drove away from the spot, my mind racing. The silence in the car felt unbearable now, even though I was alone. I kept telling myself that I was just overthinking it, that maybe I'd missed something, that there had to be a logical explanation. But deep down I knew something wasn't right. How could someone just vanish from the back seat without a trace? I had never experienced anything like this before, and it was starting to mess with my head. It wasn't just the empty seat. It was the feeling of being watched, like I wasn't alone in the car anymore. I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting him to show up again, but no matter how many times I checked, it was always empty. The rest of the night felt off, like the whole world had shifted slightly out of place. I couldn't focus on anything. My mind kept going back to that moment. I kept replaying the details, over and over. The stillness of the man, the way he'd sat there without moving, and then, nothing. I finally pulled into my driveway, still shaken but trying to convince myself that I was just tired, that I'd imagined things. But when I walked inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me home, that something was still out there waiting. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the empty back seat, the way he sat so unnaturally still, the way he never once looked up. I kept telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but the feeling of unease wouldn't go away. At some point, I even considered checking the car again, just to make sure I hadn't missed something, but the thought of opening that back door made my skin crawl. What if I found something I didn't want to see? The next day, I forced myself to go back to work, but I couldn't shake the paranoia. Every time I picked up a new passenger, I felt this deep, nagging fear that I'd look in the mirror and see him sitting there again, head down, unmoving. But I never did. I never saw him again. I even checked the ride history, but strangely, there was no record of that trip. No pickup, no drop-off. Like it never happened. I don't know what I experienced that night, and honestly, I don't think I ever want to find out. But I'll tell you this, I still drive at night, but I never ever accept rides from quiet streets anymore. When I first moved into this apartment, I was just relieved to have finally found a decent place within my budget. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small one-bedroom in an older building, but it was clean, and the neighborhood was quiet. At least, that's what I thought. A few weeks in, I started noticing something strange. Every single night, like clockwork, between 2 and 3 a.m., I would hear the unmistakable sound of furniture scraping against the floor above me. Not just once or twice, this went on for nearly an hour. Along with it came heavy, deliberate footsteps pacing back and forth, like someone restlessly moving things around. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe my upstairs neighbor was an insomniac, or maybe they worked late shifts and rearranged their apartment in the middle of the night. Weird, but not impossible. But as the nights went on, the noises didn't just continue, they became eerier. Some nights, it sounded like something massive being dragged across the entire apartment, a deep, grating noise that made the ceiling creak. Other times, the footsteps would stop completely, only for sudden, loud thuds to echo through my bedroom ceiling, as if something heavy had just been dropped. I told myself it was just an odd quirk of the building, that old apartments had strange noises, and that it was nothing to lose sleep over. But the thing is, I was losing sleep. Every night, I'd wake up around 2 a.m. like my body already expected it, lying in bed, with my heart pounding as I listened to those slow, deliberate footsteps moving just above me. One night, after nearly a month of this, I finally had enough. I was exhausted, frustrated, and honestly a little unnerved. I decided I'd just go upstairs and knock on their door. Maybe politely ask them to keep it down, or at least understand what the hell they were doing at that hour. So I got out of bed, threw on a hoodie, and stepped into the hallway. The building was dead silent, the kind of quiet that made the sound of my own footsteps feel too loud. When I reached the apartment directly above mine, I hesitated. There was no light coming from under the door, no sounds from inside. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. Nothing. No shuffling, no movement, just dead silence. The weirdest part, the door looked off. Dust had gathered along the bottom edge like it hadn't been opened in a while. The peephole was covered with something from the inside, and when I leaned in, trying to hear any sign of life, I caught a faint, musty smell like stale air and old wood. Something about it made my skin crawl. I stood there for another minute, debating whether I should knock again, but the longer I stood in that dimly lit hallway, the more wrong it felt. Eventually, I just turned around and went back to my apartment, locking the door behind me. That night, the sounds didn't come at 2 a.m. For the first time in weeks, I slept straight through, but the relief didn't last. The next night, just as I was starting to believe maybe the noises had stopped for good, they came back, only this time they were different. At exactly 2:13 a.m., I woke up to the sound of something scraping against the ceiling, but it wasn't furniture this time. It was slower, more deliberate, like nails dragging across the wood. My entire body tensed as I listened, barely breathing. Then the footsteps started again, but instead of pacing back and forth like before, They stopped directly above my bed. I stared at the ceiling, frozen, my mind racing. It was like whoever, or whatever, was up there knew exactly where I was. And then came the worst part, a single heavy knock right above me. I don't know how long I lay there, paralyzed, waiting for something else to happen. Another knock, a whisper, anything. But after that one sound, everything went completely silent. I barely slept the rest of the night, and as soon as the sun came up, I made up my mind. I needed answers. So later that morning, I went straight to the building manager's office. The guy was always half buried in his newspaper, barely looking up whenever someone needed something. When I told him about the noises from the apartment upstairs, he didn't even flinch. He just flipped a page and muttered, "That apartment's been empty for months." I just stood there, waiting for him to say something else, to acknowledge how insane that sounded. But he didn't. He just kept reading, like what he'd just said was the most normal thing in the world. "That's not possible," I finally said, my voice coming out shakier than I'd like. "I hear someone up there. Every night." He sighed, finally lowering the newspaper just enough to glance at me. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, like he'd had this conversation before. "Look," he said, rubbing his temple, "that place has been empty since the last guy left. No one's renting it. No one has keys. If you're hearing something, it's not coming from there." And just like that, he went back to his paper, effectively ending the conversation. I walked out of his office in a daze, my mind spinning. I wanted to believe he was messing with me, or maybe just mistaken, but deep down, I knew he wasn't. That apartment felt empty when I stood in front of its door. There were no lights, no signs of life. So what the hell had I been hearing? That night, I barely ate. I didn't watch TV, didn't even scroll on my phone. I just sat on my couch, staring at the ceiling, waiting. And at exactly 2 a.m., the noises started again. The dragging, the footsteps, the knock, this time not just above my bed, but above my living room, my kitchen. Like something was moving through the entire space above me, making sure I knew it was there. I don't know what came over me, but I snapped. Maybe it was the exhaustion, maybe it was the sheer frustration of being told that nothing was there when I could hear it with my own ears. I grabbed a broom and slammed the handle against the ceiling, hitting it hard over and over. "I know you're there," I shouted. The second the words left my mouth, the noises stopped completely. The silence that followed was so thick it made my ears ring. I stood there, broom still in hand, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it. And then directly above me, 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Not like the other ones. This time it was responding. I felt ice crawl up my spine. I don't know why, but I suddenly knew I'd made a mistake. The air in my apartment felt heavier, like the room itself was pressing in on me. My instinct screamed at me to move, to leave, but I was frozen. Then the sound started again, not footsteps this time, but something dragging along the floor above, moving towards the far corner of my ceiling, towards the entrance to my apartment. And right as it reached that point, my hallway light flickered. Once, twice, then it went out completely. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I grabbed my keys, threw open my door, and ran. I didn't stop running until I was outside the building, standing barefoot on the freezing pavement. My chest was tight, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped my keys. The street was empty, dead silent except for the distant hum of traffic. I turned back to look at my apartment window, half expecting to see something, someone staring back at me. But there was nothing, just the dark outline of my living room, perfectly still. I stood there for what felt like forever, trying to convince myself to go back inside, to be rational. But my gut was screaming at me not to. Eventually, I forced myself to go back in, but there was no way in hell I was sleeping there. That night, I grabbed my backpack, shoved some clothes and my laptop inside, and went straight to a cheap motel a few blocks away. The whole time, I kept telling myself I was overreacting, that I was being ridiculous. But deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't just old building noises or my imagination running wild. Something was in that apartment above mine. And worse, whatever it was, it knew I had noticed it. I didn't go back the next day, or the day after. I called in sick to work, stayed at the motel, and ignored my phone any time my landlord tried to reach me. I just couldn't bring myself to Stepped foot in that building again. But on the third day, curiosity got the best of me. In broad daylight, I walked back, telling myself I'd just grab the rest of my things and be done with it. The moment I stepped inside, though, something felt off. The air was stale, like the place had been shut for years. The silence was unnatural, too heavy. I tried to shake it off, moving quickly to pack up my things. But then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The dust. A thick layer of dust covered my kitchen counter, my coffee table, even my bed. Like no one had been in there for months. Like I hadn't been living there at all. My brain scrambled for an explanation. Maybe a leak from the ceiling? Maybe I just hadn't noticed it before? But then I looked down. Right by my front door, in the dust-covered floor, there was a trail of footsteps. Bare footprints, leading from the entrance to the center of my living room, and stopping directly below where I had heard the knocks that night. I don't remember leaving. I don't remember locking the door. I just remember running, and I never looked back. I worked late at the office last night, which wasn't unusual, but for some reason it felt different this time. By the time I packed up and got ready to leave, the floor was practically deserted. The usual hum of distant voices, printers, and ringing phones was gone, leaving only the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead. Even the cleaning staff, who were usually around at this hour, seemed to be nowhere in sight. As I stepped into the hallway, my heels clicking against the polished floor, I felt an odd sense of unease settle over me. I shook it off, telling myself I was just tired. When I reached the elevator, I pressed the button and waited. The light blinked, but nothing happened. I pressed it again. Still nothing. I glanced at the digital display above. It was stuck on the top floor. I sighed, shifting my bag on my shoulder. Maybe the janitor had propped it open while cleaning. I waited another minute, but the number didn't change. Annoyed, I decided to take the stairs up to see what was going on. It was just one floor. Up, no big deal. But as I climbed, the silence of the building started to feel oppressive, like I was the only person left in the entire place. When I reached the top floor, I immediately noticed the elevator doors were slightly open, just enough to see the dimly lit interior. It was odd. Usually the doors either stayed fully open or closed, never in between. My first thought was that someone was holding them ajar, maybe a coworker waiting for the elevator to reset. But as I stepped closer, I realized there was no one there. The space inside was completely empty. No janitor, no late-night employee, nothing. Just the quiet hum of the elevator's overhead light and that unsettling gap between the doors. I hesitated, feeling a prickling sensation crawl up my neck. Something about this wasn't right. If no one was inside, why hadn't the doors shut completely? I leaned in slightly, peering around the small opening, half expecting to see a foot or a hand wedged between them. But there was nothing. Just the empty interior and the mirrored walls reflecting my own confused expression. I stepped back, suddenly aware of how alone I was. The thought of getting into that elevator made my stomach turn, but I couldn't exactly stay here all night. I reached out and pressed the button on the side panel, hoping it would force the doors to either fully open or close. Nothing happened. The doors didn't budge. The elevator didn't make a sound. I pressed it again, harder this time. Still nothing. The silence stretched thick and unnatural. That was when I noticed something that made my breath catch. Despite the elevator being stuck on this floor, the digital display above the door flickered and changed. It now showed the ground floor. My stomach dropped. That didn't make any sense. If the elevator was here, why was the display showing it on another floor? I stepped back instinctively, my mind racing through possible explanations. A malfunction? A glitch? But then, before I could even process what was happening, the doors suddenly snapped shut with a force that made me jump. No warning, no slow slide like normal. Just a sharp, mechanical slam. And then from the other side of the doors, I heard it, faint but unmistakable. A shuffle, like someone shifting there. Wait. I froze. The sound was soft, almost imperceptible, but in the dead silence of that empty office building it was deafening. It wasn't the hum of machinery or the creak of old elevator cables. This was deliberate, like the slight movement of feet repositioning. My throat went dry. I knew with absolute certainty that the elevator had been empty. I had looked inside, but now something or someone was in there. My first instinct was to run, but my legs refused to move. I just stood there, heart hammering, staring at the closed doors, waiting for something to happen. Then the elevator let out a chime. The doors should have opened again, but they didn't. The display flickered once more, jumping from the ground floor to the basement. I hadn't even realized our building had a basement. The shuffle came again, this time followed by something else, a low, almost imperceptible exhale, like a breath just barely slipping through the crack between the doors. That was enough. My body finally caught up with my brain, and I turned, bolting down the stairs as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I was back on my floor, breath coming in short, panicked gasps. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone, but my fingers were clumsy and steady. I wanted to call someone's security, a coworker, anyone, but who was I even supposed to call? What would I say? Hey, I think there's something in the elevator. It sounded ridiculous. And yet, every instinct in my body was screaming at me to get out of there. I forced myself to move toward the main hallway, toward the exit. But just as I reached the glass doors that led to the lobby, I heard the chime again. The elevator had come down. Slowly, almost against my own will, I turned to look. The doors were open. From where I stood, I could see the interior. Empty. Of course, empty. But the moment my eyes locked onto the mirror inside, my blood ran cold. There was a smudge on the glass, like the oily imprint of a hand pressed flat against the mirror, as if someone had been standing inside, facing it. I couldn't move. My brain was trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a smudge from someone earlier, maybe I was imagining things, but deep down I knew better. That mirror had been spotless when I looked inside before. My skin prickled as I realized something else. The imprint wasn't at a normal height. It was higher up, like someone had been standing on their toes or something taller had pressed its hand there. My stomach churned. Then, before I could react, the elevator doors slammed shut again. No delay, no warning, just a violent snap that echoed through the empty lobby. And then the sound that will haunt me for the rest of my life. From inside the elevator, muffled by the doors, came a single distinct knock. Slow, deliberate, as if whoever, or whatever, was in their new eye was still standing outside. That was it. I turned and sprinted out of the building, not even bothering to glance back. The night air hit me like a shock, but I didn't stop running until I reached my car. My hands were trembling so badly that I fumbled with my keys, nearly dropping them twice before finally managing to unlock the door. I got in, slammed it shut, and locked it immediately. My pulse was pounding in my ears, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I sat there for a long time, staring at the office building, half expecting to see something, or someone watching me, from the glass doors. But there was nothing, just the empty lobby, the dim glow of the elevator display flickering inside. I never told anyone at work what happened. The next day, I took the stairs without even thinking. I avoided that elevator for weeks. But one evening, curiosity got the better of me, and I forced myself to glance inside as I passed by. The smudge on the mirror was gone. The elevator worked fine, as if nothing had ever happened. Maybe it was just a glitch, a malfunction. Maybe my mind had been playing tricks on me. That's what I tell myself. But sometimes, when I work late and the office is empty, I swear I hear it again. That faint, deliberate shuffle. And those were today's true terror tales. If you enjoyed the chills, don't forget to subscribe for more real horror stories. Until next time, stay in the light.